Yeah. Okay. Hopefully y'all can hear me in here, but I'm just going to shout out our online folks, making sure everyone can hear me online. You don't have to say yes or no, but if it's a no, do tell someone so that we can get you sorted out technically on there. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Emily Williamson. I'm with the Siskiyou Land Trust. We're so grateful to have you out here today. We are gratefully acknowledging the Native peoples on whose homelands we steward, as well as the diverse Native communities who make up the homes where we live today. We're grateful to be a part of a community that stewards land as a whole. So thanks y'all for joining us and being a part of this conversation. Like I said, I am Emily Williamson. I'm with the Siskiyou Land Trust. We are here today to talk about agricultural conservation easements. I hope you're all in the right place. This work is supported by the Regional Conservation Partnership Program at USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. So thanks to them for making this conversation possible. We're so happy you're here. We also have lots of other fantastic folks from the Land Trust joining us today. I'm just going to do some quick introductions as we go around. We have staff and board here represented to answer all of your questions. Like I said, my name is Emily. Over here in the front row, we have Alexis Robertson. She's our acquisitions director. Behind her, we have Ann Womack, Dr. Ann Womack, board member. And then a couple more rows back, we've got Hannah Link, conservation coordinator. Next to her is Marty Sochet, not a board member, but a friend of Siskiyou Land Trust and member of our acquisitions committee, which you'll hear all about a little bit later. In the corner back there, I have Jessica Matthews. She's our conservation project manager. And then heading over here, I've got Greg Francois, board member. We have Dorinda Thompson, board member right there as well. A huge thank you to Ann and Dorinda for these snacks, which you're welcome to. Please help yourself if you're feeling peckish. Again, my name is Emily. I am joining from Scott Valley. I'm a Scott Valley gal. I live over in Etna. Do we have anyone also joining from Scott Valley? Anyone else from West County? Okay. Anyone from North County joining us today? That's okay. South County. Oh, we do have North County right here. Where? Well, tell me where you're from. Gazelle. Fantastic. Welcome, 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 welcome. We're super happy to have you. Anyone not from Siskiyou County coming out from outside? Hi, come on in. Welcome. Okay, great. We're so happy to have you. Welcome in. There's a sign-in sheet and some snacks. Please help yourself. My name is Emily. We were just saying hello. We're really happy to have you. Thank you so much for coming today. We had some change of dates and some weather, and we just appreciate everyone's flexibility, and we're excited to be here learning with you and talking about conservation and the possibility for a conservation easement in your future. Inside of your packet, we've got a couple of things. We've got a survey, which is going to be the best way to keep in touch with us. So we are going to ask all folks to fill out that survey that's in your landowner packet. There also is a copy of this table of contents if you get lost along the way, so you know where we're headed. We're starting with the welcome. That's what's happening right now. So we're right on track. Fantastic. Then we're going to talk about conservation easements in general. Hi there. Welcome in. Come on in. Sign in, grab some snacks, get seated. Not a problem at all. We're so happy to have you. We're just going over the agenda for today. We'll talk about conservation easements. We'll talk about agricultural conservation easements in general. And then we'll talk about the acquisition and the stewardship process. There'll be time for questions throughout. If at any point you can't understand me or you have a question about something I mentioned, go ahead, raise your hand. I'd be happy to answer a question. If you have some personalized questions about your own conservation goals or about how an easement might fit into your life as a landowner, we're going to save those until the end. We'll have a more lively discussion about what SLT could mean for you and your family. So who is Siskiyou Land Trust? You heard me say SLT. That's what we call ourselves, just a little abbreviation there. Siskiyou Land Trust is a community-based private and local nonprofit. We aim to permanently conserve and steward the irreplaceable wild places, watersheds, and working places that are the heart of Siskiyou County, this beautiful place we call home. So excited to be here with y'all. We both explore and create our own opportunities for conservation. We use a variety of tools to help landowners accomplish their own personal land protection objectives. Agricultural conservation easements, or Ag CEs, which we're talking about today, are just one of those tools. We have other types of conservation easements for forests and timberlands and open space and riparian habitats. But aside from conservation easements, Siskiyou Land Trust also holds property outright. We call that fee title property. It's property that we own and steward ourselves, be that a demonstration forest or an old ranch preserve in Mount Shasta. We're very well known for Sisson Meadow in downtown Mount Shasta. If any of y'all are familiar with that, that is Siskiyou Land Trust property that we enhance and weed and generally keep up for the public's enjoyment. Super proud of that little piece in the downtown heart of Mount Shasta. We're aiming to protect the rural character and the natural resources of Siskiyou County. And that rural character, that piece is a huge part about this agricultural conservation easement conversation, right? We know that ranch lands, we know that working lands are a huge part of what makes this sliver of Northern California so special. So thanks for being here today. Thanks for the work that you do as landowners, as stewards. We're happy to have you. You'll also find us, in addition to doing conservation easements, in addition to owning and stewarding property outright, you'll also find us on nature walks or leading lecture series or promoting educational opportunities, partnering with other local, state, and federal agencies to foster long-term stewardship and education in our fantastic community. We have permanently protected through conservation easements and in fee title around 40,000 acres so far, which is incredible. We have another 40,000 acres waiting in the pipeline, ready for funding, ready to be conserved. We're hoping to hit 100,000 acres by 2030. That's our current internal goal. And who knows, maybe your land could help us get to that milestone. So hopefully we'll learn about it together and see where we can go. All right, I have a brief little video telling you about ourselves and our work as Siskiyou Land Trust. So let's watch that together.
Siskiyou Land Trust is a local land conservation organization. That means we can hold land for that purpose or hold conservation easements. Those are the tools we use. When the Land Trust holds a conservation easement, it runs with the land forever in perpetuity, meaning our conservation easements, which we have, almost 40,000 acres worth of right now, will be 40,000 acres of intact landscape. Siskiyou Land Trust has been a primarily volunteer-driven organization. We have an all-volunteer board that helps give direction of the land trust, and now we have a growing staff. We have a whole cadre of volunteers that help with stewardship of our meadow and our forests. We have landowner partners that also are part of our capacity to do the work we do. Working with private landowners is essential. So much of public benefit moves through private land. Our water, our soil to grow food, our forests that aren't just commodities, they're really places of habitat, watershed health, mental health. It's so intrinsically valuable, it's hard to even articulate how important these places are, and they are a part of us as much as we are a part of them. Siskiyou County cannot conserve and host all of the species without partnering with our working lands owners who actually steward a lot of their landscape for the purpose of protecting and providing habitat.
I really think some of the best things that you can do for land is to put them under conservation easements. It's been really a seminal change in our life and how we ranch, and it's not to be misconstrued with changing our ranching operation, but just a certain amount of freedom of mind and spirit that comes from having an easement on your ranch, where you know that your work and your dedication is going to be there for a lot longer and not be disrupted in some subsequent generation. So it adds a lot of serenity to how you see and how you manage your land.
It's just very, very interesting to work with these landowners because some of them are more passionate than we are. Out of that has evolved a way in which we can mitigate what's been happening to our Earth Mother.
We're at a tipping point when it comes to climate change, and while it might seem like a daunting moment, we're poised to really be in a time of history of making a difference. And so Siskiyou Land Trust is located in this place that is filled with opportunities for meaningful work, inspiring work, and how lucky are we to get to do that?
The poet Gary Snyder put it perfectly. Somebody said to him, "What's the best thing I can do for the environment to save the earth?" And he said, "Stay home." And it's not just in terms of saving carbon credits from flying or burning fuel, but it was more where you live, you're going to be most connected to. This area is so beautiful. To me, it just captivates and gets my attention more and more. And my connection with this area has just gotten deeper and deeper over time. And so I always think back on those words, stay home is the best thing you could do to help save the planet, because you'll want to save where you live first and foremost. And if you're working there, you're doing a good job.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to bring up Jessica Matthews. Like I said, she's our conservation project manager, and she's going to talk a little bit about conservation easements and agricultural conservation easements in general. Any questions before I welcome her up? Okay, fantastic. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Emily. For folks that are joining us via Zoom, if you do have any questions, please put them in chat and we'll be able to monitor those and get back to you as soon as possible. It's really exciting to be here with you guys. Thanks again for being flexible for our last conservation easement workshop moving here today. So yeah, we're going to dive into a little bit of the nuts and bolts. What is a conservation easement? It is a voluntary legal agreement between a landowner and a land trust or a government entity. The purpose of conservation easements are to restrict certain land uses and protect conservation values. So these are rights of the land, specifically, technically, mainly developmental rights. It should be noted that conservation easements, the terms of these easements, so what are these reserved rights? What are these restricted rights? They are customized and very specific to each landowner and property. Not one conservation easement is the same as the next, or if you have a conservation easement and your neighbor has one, they may look very different from one another. And again, that just depends on what your values and priorities are as a landowner, and of course, what the Siskiyou Land Trust priorities and values are. Each conservation easement needs to have a public benefit or plural public benefits associated with it. This can be an array of things. So think improved water quality, preserving farm and ranch life, wildlife habitat, scenic views, open space, cultural, historic, local preservation, the list goes on. The biggest thing to note with conservation easements, though, is that they are permanently attached to the land in perpetuity. You can still sell your land, your heirs can inherit the land, the conservation easement itself moves with the land. So a little bit about how we as a land trust view conservation easements on our property. They're very much a real estate transaction. So the traditional view when we think of real estate is kind of that geographical part or focus, like this parcel of land is moving to another owner, or we're taking a larger parcel of land and we're breaking it apart and selling pieces. With the land trust, we view or focus on layers, and these are layers of rights that are associated with the property. So examples can be developmental rights, subdivision rights, subsurface mineral rights. The list really goes on, and that's where it can kind of get a little bit into the weeds, but we work directly with the landowner, such as yourself, to look at what reserved rights there are that you maintain and what restrictions and rights there are. I think in essence, conservation easements separate specific rights from the land title without a transfer in ownership. So we are purchasing a layer of the property. You are maintaining ownership of your property. What are layers of focus? Gosh, there are so many to count, but I think the three main buckets of layers are conservation values, rural character, and sustainable economies. So what I mean by that is when we're looking at layers of focus that the land trust is interested in, we look at conservation values, which can be natural resources and ecosystems. It encompasses biological, ecological, social, cultural, historical aspects of very high significance. The rural character layer is really open space, maintaining mountains, maintaining forests, maintaining farmlands, the list goes on. Sustainable economies, what I mean by that is really keeping those interconnected landscapes and those associated infrastructures together. Think agricultural working lands, really keeping working lands working. And then maintaining and providing generational opportunities into the future that are already present with the working lands we have today. So you might ask, what type of land can be protected? In essence, all land can be protected. As far as Siskiyou Land Trust is concerned, the land that we look at protecting with our landowners include natural habitat, watersheds, scenic landscapes, and then for the main focus of this presentation here and y'all present is working landscapes. So this includes working lands, agricultural lands, ranches, and forests. As Emily mentioned, we have conserved about 40,000 acres so far, 8,000 acres of which are actually working agricultural lands with landowners such as yourselves. So a working landscape is a landscape where the lands are managed to support livelihood and natural resources. When we talk about working landscapes, we're talking ranch lands, farmlands, and forest lands. When a conservation easement is put on a ranch land or farmland, it's then considered an agricultural conservation easement. So the Siskiyou Land Trust works with private landowners or landowners to conserve working lands for future generations. And this is primarily done by putting or reducing parcelization and subdivision on that property. How conservation easements affect the land? There's many different ways in which they do, but again, it's really important to note that they're super tailored to you and your priorities and needs. There's many different layers of focus, those conservation values, rural character values, the sustainable economy values, and then you may have your own personal values, goals, and priorities as well that you're wanting to focus on why you're wanting to maintain your land. So again, they're very different than one another, or they can change from one easement to another, but they are tailored to the land trust and landowners' needs. And while Siskiyou Land Trust has many different conservation values we're interested in protecting, some of which we've already gone over, oftentimes, and really many times, most of the times, those values are paralleled and reflected already in the work that local landowners are doing on their land. So for example, a local rancher may want a local ranch, may be part of a critical migration corridor. That's actually what this photo is. Kind of nerdy, I know, but it's a critical migration corridors in Siskiyou County. So we as a land trust would be really interested as our conservation plan in making sure that we're protecting those critical migration corridors. Your land as a landowner may fall within those migrational corridors. If that's the case, then Siskiyou Land Trust, this is just an example, there's many, can buy the developmental rights. So the development rights or subdivision rights that are associated with your property from the ranch without splitting up the ranch or changing ownership, if that makes sense. So we're hitting some personal goals as an organization of maintaining not just agricultural working lands, we're maintaining migrational corridors, we're increasing biodiversity in the area, and the rancher or landowner can continue business as normal in your agricultural operations, just removing the developmental rights from it, while also getting paid for that. And then SLT, in conjunction and in partnership with y'all, has secured that habitat in perpetuity. This is actually a really great representation of that. This is a local ranch in Scott Valley. The image on your left is that ranch developmental potential before putting a conservation easement on it. And then the image to the right is the after. So after we put a conservation easement on that property, and I'll bring your attention to these, little red houses or icons on here. So based on Siskiyou County zoning ordinances, the Scott Valley plan specifically, this piece of property could have potentially been broken apart, subdivided, parcelized into 75 residential home sites with granny units associated with it. So that fragmentation of the property kind of speaks for itself just in the image. The image to the right shows what the developmental potential is on that property now with a conservation easement in place. And so part of what Siskiyou Land Trust does in working with you is looking at, okay, how many residential areas do you have on your property right now? We call those building envelopes. How many do you want to reserve the right to have in perpetuity? Which can be a hard question, takes some time to figure out. You know, do you want to have some granny units on there? Do you want to make sure you have housing set aside or area for housing to be put for future generations? Do you want to reserve the right to set aside some land for farm labor housing? But we call that out ahead of time. And you'll see on this image, there are 5 residential developmental envelopes. So in perpetuity, this land will only ever have 5 residential building envelopes and is unable to be parceled out to 75 pieces. Let's hear a little bit about this from these specific landowners, Gareth and Millie.
I'm Gareth Plank, and I've owned Scott River Ranch for about 25 years and had the joy of being married to Millie for just over 20 years now. And it's always nice when you marry your next door neighbor and you can combine the 2 ranches.
My family moved here from the Bay Area, looking for a Shangri-La that was a place to raise a family. My dad, his family had farmed multi-generationally down in the Bay Area, and it became impossible to continue farming there because of encroachment of population and land taxes. So he did not want to see something similar happen here. And so when this opportunity came up to have the ranches still be able to work them, still be able to use them for the family to live there and to make a living off of into perpetuity, keep it from being subdivided, he was all over it.
I grew up in the San Joaquin Valley, had moved to the Bay Area, and it doesn't take many years to see the world be despoiled by what you might call unbridled development. I didn't want the ranch to be something that was just monetized for my children. I wanted it to be a sanctuary from the wide world, and if they wanted to be here on a multi-generational basis and enjoy the land for what it had to offer and not as part of a checkbook, that was something that was of keen interest to me. And as it turns out, that was of keen interest to our daughters as well. We have numerous endangered or threatened species on this ranch. That makes it much more attractive for something like the Land Trust or WCB, Wildlife Conservation Board, to say we're going to invest in putting an easement on this property.
And one of the things that Siskiyou Land Trust has done for us that was wonderful is taking the time to really answer all those questions. As landowners, it's scary to say we're going to be tying up your land into perpetuity. So that is a process that takes a lot of time, a lot of questions, a lot of time spent by staff members of the Land Trust with us to answer questions and to make sure that the funding that is there matches our goal.
The largest conservation holder in the state of California is the California Cattlemen's. This is ranchers in California, the guys with a hat like me on. They have 350,000 acres under their domain held as easements by ranchers for ranchers. And what they discovered, the best way to save the family ranch was in a conservation easement. Most of my neighbors, or all of my neighbors now, have easements, and more are following suit, realizing that a great way to keep on a multi-generational basis these farms and ranches in place is through conservation easements. It takes that development pressure out. It adds a little liquidity to the family for members who don't want to farm. So I don't want to get too misty-eyed here. The day before Keith, Millie's father, died, he sits up in bed, and Jennifer, Millie's sister, and I were there, and he says, "The best thing I did in my life was to put that ranch under an easement. The best thing I did." That's pretty telling.
I love that video. So as Gareth and Millie talked about, there's many different reasons why protection of conservation specifically. Could you speak a little louder? Of course, I'm so sorry. As Gareth and Millie had mentioned in their video there, the protection of agricultural lands is extremely important. This is my favorite photo recently. This is a local rancher, Jennifer Thackeray, and I think it's important that she gets to ride around on her ATV all day with her corgi. But aside from that, other benefits to agricultural lands and the protection of them, is there just, at least in Siskiyou County, a major working landscape and a major priority, not just for locals here, but for our organization as well. Again, agricultural lands can include many different layers of focus, going back to those conservation values, the rural character values, and sustainable economy values, just to name a few. And as Kathleen said in the video earlier, landowners really are the best stewards of their lands. I mean, y'all make invaluable partners when working to conserve lands. You guys know the land itself, the layout, you have a relationship with it, and know how to care and take care of it, which includes those natural resources on your land as well. So why consider a conservation easement? There are many, many reasons. I'll focus on 4 main reasons. The first one's a little bit intense of a statement, but I feel like it's true. You can control the future. You can decide how your land is used for generations to come. You can make sure that your blood, sweat, and tears go on in perpetuity. The legacy that you leave behind is protected for you and yours, or however you see fit to manage your land in the future. Another reason is private ownership. The land remains privately owned, but is now protected from development through this conservation easement. You can sell your land. It can go to your heirs. The only difference is what are those restrictions and reserved or restricted rights rather. And that's what the land trust purchases from you and then helps you to conserve that in perpetuity. Again, can't say it enough, maintaining generational practices, I think allowing the future generations to continue the work that's being done on your land and just affording those opportunities into the future can't be understated. There's also major monetary incentives. I will say that all landowners should obtain their own independent legal, financial, and tax advice. That's our little disclaimer, but the monetary incentives that you receive from putting a conservation easement on your property can help support generational change. It can help in succession planning, cash flow, additional stewardship. Maybe you want to reinvest that money into the property itself, and does have tax implications and savings associated with it. Since we're on the topic of money, you might be wondering, how are conservation easements, how are they valued? How are they determined? There is a specific process that goes into it. Conservation easements are appraised by conservation easement appraisers. We look at the before conservation easement fair market value. So that is the property prior to any restrictions put in place. And then we look at that after conservation easement value with restrictions in place. So the difference of the two is the valuation of the conservation easement itself. An example is, say the fair market value of your property is $1 million prior to putting an easement on it. After you put an easement on it with the restrictions, it drops that value to $650,000. The value of the CE, conservation easement, is then 35% of that original value, or $350,000. That is what the land trust will pay you to put a conservation easement on your property and to remove those reserved rights. Again, it's just a layer. You maintain it on the property. What you do with the money is up to you. Yes.
After you put a conservation easement on the property, who do we have to notify, the tax assessor, or what happens with that?
That's a great question. Do we have a good answer?
It'll get recorded on your title, and so the assessor will look at it because they go through all the things that get recorded. So they get notified through the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Will
you.
you repeat that answer to the microphone for the folks on Zoom?
Thank you. Yeah. So the question was, how does the tax change get recorded? And so the easement is recorded, goes on your title, and then the assessor can look at that at the county level. Any other questions on that?
So then it'd be fair to say that the tax assessor would probably now assess it 650,000 instead of the million?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So post conservation easement, for this example, your property value would be $650,000. Something to note is that, well, there's a lot of things to note, but that $350,000 in this example can go through a 1031 exchange. There's also portions of that that can be a write-off value. So in a nutshell, conservation easements are voluntary, flexible, keyword flexible, agreements that permanently keep lands intact and in private ownerships. While there's many, many different benefits for agricultural landowners like yourself, three big take-home ones are protecting land for future generations, receiving financial incentives, and helping to conserve vital habitats and landscapes. I think the main takeaway from this portion of the presentation is that conservation easements are really a powerful tool for landowners who want to safeguard their property's future. And we're here to help you make that happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. I really love seeing that map side by side. As landowners, you know this, so much of the value of your land is tied up in its potential, right? Like you could sell it and it could potentially be 75 home sites. But most of us that are here as landowners don't want to see our ranches become 75 home sites. That's not a ranch, that's a development, right? And so Siskiyou Land Trust acts as that bridge between what your potential value is and to help you conserve it and keep it from being subdivided. So I just love seeing those two maps together of how, you know, a big, beautiful ranch in Scott Valley could have been 75 home sites, could have been the next development on a hill. And rather it has maintained its working character and is maintained as a rural ranching gem of Northern California. Next, we're going to hear from Alexis Robertson. She's our acquisitions director. She's going to talk to you a little bit about the acquisition process, what it means to acquire a conservation easement, and then about the stewardship process, what it means to steward it after we have that conservation easement in place. Thanks, Alexis.
Hi, everybody. Have to have a cow picture in there, right? I am gonna kind of overlay the whole process that any land trust would have to go through to get from the start to the finish, and then kind of explain why Siskiyou Land Trust is just a really great local partner. We're the only land trust in Siskiyou County. Other organizations can work here, but we are here. We can sit down at your kitchen table and help walk you through this process, which can take 2 to 5 years. But what's 2 to 5 years when you're 6th generation on this land? So each project starts with an inquiry, which is folks coming to us voluntarily to talk about what is an easement. So y'all being here is kind of the first step of that. All of our inquiries are confidential, so we don't share any of the information out with the public until the landowner is ready to do that. We'll work with you to kind of scope out the project. We'll look at maps. We'll look at migration corridors like Jessica showed, and we'll look at riparian areas just to kind of scope out the project. And then there is a project questionnaire, which is in your packet. And that's really the first step of filling that out. We can kind of look at the type of project, if it's a forest project, ag project, maybe a combination of the two. And then easements can be donated. They can be partially donated for tax deductions, or they can be purchased. We also look at the conservation values, which we've talked about. You guys know what those are now. And then also it's really important that the entire family is in agreement. Oftentimes we'll get a little bit down the road and someone will say, one member of the family will say, I don't want to do this, then the project falls apart. So really making sure that everyone who has a stake in the property is on board and wants to continue. And then we'll also look at the timeline because these do take a while. We'll need to make sure that that fits with your family and their financial needs. Once we have the questionnaire filled out, then our acquisition committee will come and schedule a site visit. So some of our committee is here. Marty is here. Dorinda is here. We have 7 folks on our acquisition committee that help look at the inquiry. We get a lot of inquiries and not all of them will be able to be projects. We'll come out and look at the conservation values and the landowner goals and really listen. Then we'll order a preliminary title report, which will allow us to see if there's any issues that may cloud the title. So this could be access issues, like if there's a railroad going through your property and you don't have legal access over it, that might be a big hurdle. So we look at those types of things and make sure that they can get cleared up before we close. The committee will then use our selection ranking criteria to go through all of these things to make sure that the property fits the goals of the land trust. So essential items are, it needs to meet our mission, which is right down there. So agricultural, forest, wildlands. It needs to be in our service area. We work primarily in Siskiyou County, but we can work in Modoc, Shasta, and Trinity counties. We also look at the size of the property, its proximity to other conserved lands, and the development threat. We'll look at the conservation values again. We also work with folks who are really committed to conservation, either through partnerships or stewardship or community support. So we get through the ranking and then the committee decides if they want to recommend it to the board or not. So then the Land Trust Board will review the property or the project and decide to approve it, and then it'll become an active project. At that point, it goes into our pool of potential projects. So then staff can start thinking about what is the best fit for this landowner and try and find, if we're looking for grant funding, try and find a good match, as Millie said in her video. One thing to consider is the grant funds typically run on a 1 to 2 year cycle. So if your project comes in at the close of one grant, there may be a bit of a lag time to wait before we can apply for a grant. They are competitive. State grants are competitive throughout the entire state. And we typically work for our ag easements. We work with programs that want to support ag and keep it viable. So that's through the Department of Conservation. They have 2 programs. There's also the Wildlife Conservation Board that can be a good partner if there's significant wildlife values on the property. We also work with federal funds if the landowner chooses to. The RCPP program was what's funding us to be here today. And both of those programs have an agricultural focus. There's also private funding through foundations as an option, but they tend to be really focused on one particular thing, like fisheries or elk habitat or something like that. So once we get the grant funded, the Land Trust holds that grant and we act as the liaison between the landowner and the funders. We're here to help navigate all of the things that government is, which is fun. So we can then start working on developing the project. We try and get our grant funds to cover the appraisal. These are getting pretty expensive these days. And agricultural conservation easement appraisal is around $15,000 right now. So we work to try and get that covered and as much of the costs as we can for the landowner. We'll draft the easement, and this can take a while because this is where we really get into the language of what does it mean to have an easement? What exactly are we going to restrict or not restrict? Where are those building envelopes going to be? How many are there? If there's a riparian area, are we going to have some limitations in there or not? And what does that look like? And you can even restrict the type of agriculture. So if you really don't want sheep on your land in 30 years, you can say that. You can put that in there. I mean, who wouldn't want sheep already? These are my sheep. We also have, we make a baseline report, which is your property, like a snapshot in time. And that will also travel with the project. And we'll go out and we'll establish photo points that are good representations of the property. And then finally, we get to payday. So closing goes through an escrow process similar to buying a property. As Jessica said, the fair market value is somewhere between 20 and 40% of the value of your property. It'll depend on how restrictive the easement is or the specifics of the zoning, or so there's a lot of gray area there. But they typically come out around there. The easement's recorded on your title with the county, and then the land trust asks for a stewardship donation. And this is what allows us to do our work into the future. So we get it all closed, all wrapped up, we're done. We've been working together forever. Now what? You're not done with us. Here we are. Laura, Emily, and Hannah are here today. Pete Townley is not here, but he works with us. He's one of our monitors, and he has an easement on his family ranch in Little Shasta. So we are local, and we are here to support you. As part of our obligation is for the easements, we need to have an annual meeting with our landowners. And it can be in person or over the phone. And we discuss any changes that the property may be planned or about to happen. So these can be leases. If you have a new lessee, they need to understand what the easement is. If you want to exercise your development right in your building envelope, we'll need to know about that. Also, if you want to show off your cool stewardship projects, we'd love to hear about that as well. And then the sale of the property, because land trusts find that it's the next owner that may not have been in the weeds and understand the easement as well, that really needs a little bit more hand-holding. So if the property does go up for sale, we'd like to know that, and then we can start that relationship with the new owner. Landowners can still engage in all the same projects that they would before, as long as they fit within the terms of that easement. So part of our annual monitoring is coming out and looking at the photo points that are in the baseline and any new things that may have popped up. Landowner is always welcome to attend, but not required to. If you want to just say, go knock yourself out, I got to go cut hay, we can go. We're very respectful of your property and your time. We carry liability insurance. We leave gates as we find them. And then there's a monitoring protocol that's attached to the easement so that when we're all dead and gone, there'll still be guidelines for how to monitor. And then one of the exciting things about having an easement on your property is there's a lot of other grant opportunities available to you. So agencies want to invest their money in places that are going to remain viable and working. So we'll hear in another video in just a minute about a water efficiency program that the Thackeray's were able to get through the land trust, specifically because they had an easement on their property. We also have some grants for wildlife enhancement. Here's a prescribed burn that happened on Scott River Ranch this fall that CAL FIRE did. There's fencing, there's restoration, there's a point of diversion changes, any kind of thing you can think of. The land trust can help either support through grants or at least be supportive of you in doing those things. We often get the question of what happens if the land trust goes away and what happens. So we work with the Land Trust Alliance, which is a national organization that oversees land trusts all over the country. And they have standards and practices that we follow, especially around finances and ethics, to make sure that we are upholding our end of the bargain for the long term. So we are actually in the thick of this and should be accredited by the end of the year. Okay, and then the last thing I just wanted to show you is this is sort of the conserved land context where we are right now. So the orange are projects that the Land Trust has closed and worked on. The yellow is what we're working on currently. And the purple are other organizations which aren't as good as us. So you can kind of see the commitment of these landowners. Really, they are making huge impacts on the future of Siskiyou County and what those big wide open spaces will look like in the future. So thanks, guys. Fantastic. Thanks, Alexis. I love looking at that. I'm over in the Scott Valley, so I'm very fond of all of that conserved land over on my side of things. Super proud of that. Something that I want to emphasize before we watch a video about Jen and Sam's water efficiency program is the confidentiality of the acquisition process. So you, for whatever reason, may not want your neighbor or the whole town to know that you're going through a conservation easement. That's a private decision for you as a landowner, and we respect that. We exercise complete confidentiality on our end. So while your project is seeking funding, we are not advertising it. We are not talking about it. We're not talking about it with our family. We're not talking about it at a restaurant, right? This is a personal decision that you and your family have made. So I just want to emphasize that it is a confidential process. So if anyone has any qualms about, maybe I don't want my neighbor across the river to know, or maybe I don't want my whole town to know that I have protected my property forever, that's okay. We're used to that. We deal with that kind of confidentiality all the time. Yeah.
So I'm gonna throw this kind of common question out.
Throw it at me.
I actually was a board member
Of Siskiyou Land Trust?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Hello.
in Japan.
Will you tell me your name?
Huh?
Will you tell me your name?
Belinda.
Belinda, hiya.
So one of the things that, like you've got the wear it,
Mhm.
that's one of the ones you own. Right?
Yes, exactly. Correct.
And so then there's the ones that are private, like the plant Whipple.
Yes.
And so I think that it's good to know that what you own is a little more visitated by people.
Yeah, fair.
And then, but if I were to put my property in a private conservation easement, not your ownership, then it wouldn't be any different than it is now. You would.
Fantastic. Yes, I am. Belinda, this is such a great question. Thank you so much. And I'm hoping I'll repeat it for anyone on Zoom. And if anyone on Zoom is having trouble hearing me, go ahead and pop it in the chat. But I'm going to repeat Belinda's question, which is, we own some properties in fee title and we own some conservation easements, right? The properties that we own in fee title, like something like Sis and Meadow, that has public access, right? We have opened that for public access. Does putting a conservation easement on your property open up your property to public access? The answer is absolutely not. No, if you want to open up your property to public access, cool. Let's talk about what that looks like and see if we can work with you for that. But no, just because we seek public funding to fund the project does not mean that you are obligated to allow the public onto your property by any means, right? Me or someone else from the stewardship program will come out annually to monitor, like we talked about. We'll look at those photo points and we'll track the progress of your land over time. But that is with your permission and with your notice. That is part of the agreement for us to come out there annually, but you are not opening up your property to the public by putting a conservation easement on it. Thank you so much for that question, Belinda. Does that answer it? Yeah. Fantastic.
So you go through this whole process.
Go through the whole process.
And we're good as gold.
Love it.
Wildfire.
Wildfire.
Completely takes everything out.
Such a great question. For those people on Zoom, I don't know if you could hear, the question is, we go through this whole process, we have a conservation easement, and then a wildfire takes everything out. What happens? Well, as a matter of fact, as Northern California folks, as a Northern California organization, we actually had a wildfire sweep through one of our conserved properties just this last summer. It was in the Scott Valley, right? I was going to sleep watching flames from my bedroom window, and unfortunately, it was one of our protected properties. Wildfire is a reality for those of us here. We've been living with it for a long time. That sort of change, that sort of giant catastrophic event on your property does not change the fact that it is conserved property, right? So with this property that we just had this last summer that experienced damage from a wildfire, it's still a conserved property. We're still working with the landowner. It's working timberland. We will oversee the restoration of it. We will continue to document yearly how the property changes and continues to overcome. It is still conserved land. We live with the reality of living with wildfire. And so that doesn't change the easement itself. It just changes our relationship with the land, but we'll continue and monitor and conserve it as an organization. Yeah.
Also, can I just add?
Yeah, this is Laura Bradley. She's our stewardship programs manager. Thanks, Laura.
Hi, yeah, and if, in the case of the property that went through a large wildfire, they are going to be applying for grants to restore, replant, improve the roads. They're gonna be more likely to receive grant funding because they do have their property in a conservation easement, so there is that benefit.
Fantastic. That's a great point. For anyone that didn't hear on Zoom, that property that we're working with that experienced catastrophic wildfire, we are working with them to seek grant funding for restoration of those roads, of planting, and they have higher likelihood of receiving those grants because they have a conservation easement on their property. Yes, Jessica.
Something else to note is that the annual meeting that we have, or the annual monitoring that occurs in the event of a catastrophic event like a wildfire, that would prompt us to check in with y'all again.
Yeah.
Make sure everyone's well, do a monitor to check that baseline of what the property looks like at that point, and then that can help with future grant funding.
Thanks, Jessica. As a member of the monitoring team, Laura is as well, we really seek to develop relationships with you as landowners, right? We're popping in every year, but if you have a cool picture from your ranch, I'd love to see it, right? This is a relationship we're trying to develop. Landowners are an incredible resource for us as an organization. Like we've said before, you know your land the best. We're looking to learn from you about that land. We're looking to grow with you as the changes in your property come to fruition. And so it's a relationship that we're looking to create. That's part of the monitoring process. But yeah, if you were to experience something, as you know, knock on wood, I'm hoping none of us will, but likelihood is, right, something's bound to happen. We work with you in that process. Thank you for that question and that comment. Let's hear from Jen and Sam a little bit about how their conservation easement helped with water efficiency on their ranch.
I'm Jen Thackeray. We're near Etna, California, clear up in Siskiyou County, near the top of the state of California, in our sleepy little mountain valley here. My family moved here in the mid-60s, and my dad actually worked up here during college and fell in love with this valley and this land. My dad loved the idea of the easement, the conservation easement, because he hated the idea of the ranch having to be sold someday or being split up and not being productive ag land. It was his dream for it to stay a working landscape that he loved.
One of the unique things about this property was that the Scott River runs right through the middle of it. And so it is provide a lot of wildlife habitat, that from salmon and aquatic species to elk and deer and bears, you name it. There's a lot of wildlife on this place.
Yeah, it's been able to be a great combination of remaining a working ranch while still providing a lot of habitat and a place to see those conservation efforts be fruitful while still maintaining the working capabilities of a ranch. Having the established conservation easement made us eligible for a California Farmland Conservancy Program grant that funded the irrigation infrastructure on this place, and it ended up being a great opportunity at perfect timing because, of course, we were faced with a 30% cutback year right as the project was approved. And so the project was implemented the same year as the cutbacks, and we were able to meet our 30% requirements easily. We put in a lot of efficiency infrastructure, the 3 pivots and a new pump with a variable frequency drive on it. We can water the ground faster and much more efficiently.
Well, it's improved our quality of life to some degree as well, because you know, with wheel lines and hand lines, you're here twice a day, every day. It's got to be changed, and it's really decreased the labor involved. And you can actually go to a ball game in the evening and watch the kids play instead of saying, no, I have to stay here and change those wheel lines. So it's been a life changer in many ways for us.
The easement ensures that this land will stay intact and be there for generations to come. It's been positive for us and for our ranch and our family, and I would encourage others to look at it and see if it would do the same for them.
So grateful to have those folks as neighbors over in the Scott Valley. Really fantastic. All right, we're going to move into our Q&A. I'll remind y'all that you have a survey in your packet. That is not only going to be the best way to keep in contact with us if you'd like to continue this conversation about the possibility of joining our Siskiyou Land Trust conservation team, but it's also the best way to be like, you know what? I think that this event could have been better. Tell us how. You've got a survey in front of you. We love that kind of feedback. I'm going to ask if anyone in the Zoom has any questions that they pop them in the chat. I've got staff here that are ready to bring them up so I can bring them to the larger group. We also have, I live on a conservation easement. You can ask me questions. We have plenty of landowners we'd be willing to connect you with if you're not quite ready to have the Siskiyou Land Trust conversation yet, but you'd like to connect with a landowner specifically and chat about what like that process looks like for them. I'd be happy to set up those conversations. But for now, does anyone have questions about anything you've heard today, about your properties in general, about the work that we're doing? Now is the time. Yeah. Would you tell me your name?
Steve Lenoy.
Hi, Steve.
Yeah, so do you have, what's minimum acreage you guys look at?
We don't set sort of guidelines like that, right? I think you heard.
What's your smallest easement, right?
What's our smallest easement right now? Brennan tract? Great question.
Pardon?
For an agricultural easement?
No, for it probably more wildlife conservation.
The Brennan tract?
12 or 13.
Yeah, just 12 or 13 acres of the Brennan tract of the riparian of the Shasta River. Is that it over outside Hammond Pond? Yeah. They donated their easement. It's a dozen acres, but it's a vital riparian habitat there. So we don't set those kind of guidelines, right? It could be any amount. Our largest easements, right? We have some that get up almost to 6,000 acres. We have some that are getting up into double-digit thousands, right? But we also recognize that every property is different. We're looking at those conservation values. We're looking at the different way that it relates to other conserved lands around it. So it really is just a case-by-case basis. We don't set those guideposts, but good question. Thanks, Steve. Yeah.
When you guys are starting to explore what the values of the land might be from a wildlife standpoint, do you send out a team of experts? I mean, I know Lauren knows birds, but no, do you actually send out and help the landowner identify, like me, I wouldn't know an endangered flower. I certainly know animals, but a flower I might have trouble with. So
that's okay.
Do you send in a team to actually look at stuff and say, oh,
Steve, that's a great question. So the question is, how are we assessing those values? What teams are we sending out to assess those conservation values? Laura, would you like to speak to that a little bit?
So there's a couple of different databases that we can access to look at that. And then once we get through the process a little bit further, then there probably would be the hiring of a botanist to look for endangered flowers, or hire a biologist to go out and look for an endangered salamander if those are likely to occur on the property. That is your question.
Yeah. So the answer was that we have access to those databases, and should your property fall in the possibility of something like that, then that we would be able to outsource experts, biologists, something for those of us that aren't experts in flowers. Me neither, Steve. We do have folks that we can seek that information from. Thank you for that question. What else? Keep it coming.
Do you ever not accept a property?
That's a great question. Like, do we ever decide not to move forward with a conservation easement? Absolutely, right? So it's a conversation between the landowner and between Siskiyou Land Trust. And should any of the things that we've been talking about today, conservation value or family reasons for whatever, absolutely. We can't fund every project. We have a limited amount of funding, and so sometimes we don't move forward with projects, unfortunately. Alexis, do you like to add anything else to that?
I think that's it. And then also this, staffing, right? So our capacity is really going to be limited. Just as we grow, we're bringing on more people to try and do more projects, but that's another consideration.
Yeah. Thank you. Belinda.
So if there is, so where I live, there's a very, very large wetlands.
Hmm.
And it's owned by numerous different families. We all live in the forest areas, obviously, but this wetland is, I mean, huge. And is there a way that you can just make that the conservation area and not the forested living areas?
Belinda, that's such a great question. Thank you. So the question is about in when we see different parcels, can we single out certain parts of properties to be conserved in relation to others? I'm going to again direct that one to Alexis, if you would.
Yeah, so there's two different ways to do it with, one way is to like just draw a circle around the wetland and say that's what's conserved. If there's multiple owners, then that gets a little tricky because.
Hang on just a second. It's this hearing aid thing. There we go. Okay.
So you can draw a circle around the wetland. If there's multiple owners in there, that makes it a little more complicated because each one's gonna have to have their own easement for that portion. The other way to do it would be to draw a big circle around the entire property and then draw a little envelope around the building area. So the whole property is still conserved but the development is restricted to that small area. So two different ways to do it. And it really is gonna be just a case by case basis. Yeah, you can just conserve just the wetland.
That speaks to things a little bit. We've mentioned this a couple times. The conservation easement is not just a template that we say, come on, we have a conservation easement for your property, right? It's individually catered to your needs as a landowner and to the property itself. So as we have two options, or maybe there could even be a couple more ways we could have done that in that case. There are lots of different ways we can single out different parts of properties and make sure that a conservation easement is tailored to your land. Yeah, come on.
Yeah. A lot of land. Well, we have 328.
320 acres, gorgeous.
So we don't raise any, we don't do any agriculture.
Mhm.
We used to have cows, but how do we know, and there's a lot of trees there, how do we know what, I don't even know how to ask the question. How do we know what's going to be developed or what we need developed? Or is that something you guys decide?
That's such a great question. So the question is, you have 320 acres. How do we decide what acreage is for what, and how do we make that decision? That's a part of the acquisition process. That's one of the reasons why conservation easements can take a couple of years, is because we are deciding, you are deciding, and working with us to decide what that looks like, right? So it is up to you to say, okay, I want this 10 acres in this part to be able to have a house built on it. I want this 100 acres up here to be rangeland, which means that cows can graze it seasonally, but not year round. I want this 50 acres to be allowed to be intensive rangeland where cows are on it year round. I want this envelope to be a barn, and you establish as the landowner what you want your land to be. It's one of the reasons why they take a long time. It's one of the reasons why we tell you to make sure all your heirs are on board, right? Gareth and Millie talked a little bit about this in their video. They have 4 daughters amongst them, and it takes a tremendous amount of family planning to put a conservation easement on your property because it's forever. And so you are making an agreement with your future heirs that this land that they will inherit maintains the use that you have set in the conservation easement. Does that make sense? Cool. Thank you so much for the question. Anyone else? Yeah, go for it, Steve. I love it.
Yeah, I could go all night, but.
Do it.
So I'm curious, I used to work a lot with elk, and on these easements, so that would probably be identified in the management plan that, okay, I have elk on the property.
Yes.
So then I'm trying to picture how that would fit into the easement as far as the elk tearing down fences and all the stuff, eating alfalfa, whatever they, the stuff they do. So, how would that be handled, I guess? Is it identified in the management plan that, we'll only support so many elk coming through our property, or,
The question is about different types of wildlife and how that relates to the conservation easement on the property. As someone that lives on property where the elk range, who gets the pleasure of spending their winter with the elk coming down the mountains, that is a conservation value to the property, right? That goes in your favor when you get the easement. The fact that you have elk coming onto your property means that you're more likely to have your property conserved because of the value of that wildlife corridor. As to whether or not we dictate anything that happens with the elk, I'll let Alexa speak a little bit about what you would write into a management plan and about how you would relate to different species. Could it be salmon? Could it be anything else that you would have on your property?
Yeah, so I think some folks that have elk on their property are able to get a tag for their elk, so that can be part of it. Some folks are like, I don't hunt elk, I don't need to hunt elk. They can take the hunting rights off their property. So there's different ways of kind of dealing with that. In terms of like nuisance animals and like coyote or, gosh, did I say wolves? We can tailor that to be, we want it to be flexible. We want it to, like, things change. We need to be as flexible as possible. We do not have a crystal ball. So typically, we kind of leave that like up to people to decide what their values are. There may be financial incentives to certain things. So if you give up hunting, you are reducing your value, therefore increasing your conservation value. So that's just something that, like, we're really in the weeds here, but that's another thing to consider. Another thing that we will often say is if you have a riparian area, if you replace that fence, maybe you should replace it with a wildlife friendly fence that fawns can go under and not get snapped up. So but if you're like, nope, I need, field fence because I have sheep, then that's not gonna work. So they really are tailored, and it's kind of a case by case basis of what's gonna make sense with your management.
Thanks, Alexis. Does that answer your question, Steve?
More or less.
Keep prodding at us if you want more specifics.
Well, so I'm just going back to, I know what elk do to fences.
Yeah.
So let's use a real life situation. Do you have anyone right now that has the easement and has an elk herd and it's just, causing a lot of fence damage, getting into their fields, et cetera? And how has that been dealt with?
As someone who lives on a property with a conservation easement with elk in our fields tearing down fences, I can tell you that it's just been it was a part of our life before we had the conservation easement on the property. It will continue to be a part of our life, right? We deal with elk, individually on a property as we see fit, in the same way that each individual landowner is either putting up, tearing down fences, leaving gates open, making sure that we know that this time of year, right, taking cows off of pasture when we know. It's really up to you as a landowner how you choose to work with the wildlife on your property. We will be having those conversations as part of the acquisition process, and like you said, a part of the management plan, but it is tailored to an individual landowner needs. If you're looking for support, are you asking for, like, can the land trust help with rebuilding fences after the elk put it down? Not quite, right? But we can help you seek funding for wildlife corridor improvements, so that, let's say you do have a bunch of old fencing that they keep tearing down and you want to seek funding to improve that fencing. Siskiyou Land Trust can act as a bridge to seek that funding with you, but we're not out there fencing with you, unfortunately. Anything else, folks? Yeah.
We have a bunch of trees blowing down.
Yeah, windstorms.
Yes. Would you be able to get someone to get some kind of grant so that the dead and dying trees could be removed?
That's a great question. And I know lots of us are concerned about dead and dying trees right now, especially with wildfire. And the question is, can Siskiyou Land Trust facilitate those type of programs? Again, we're not going to come out there with chainsaws, unfortunately. But if there is a grant that you're looking for, like we saw a picture of that prescribed burn, right? That's a CAL FIRE VTP that's on one of our properties, and we can help facilitate those kinds of agreements, right? So if there is a grant out there that is for dead and dying trees that you are seeking and you have a conservation easement on your property, Siskiyou Land Trust can again act as that bridge to help you seek that funding. I'm not aware of any dead and dying grants right now, but if you find one, you'll let us know, right? Because we want to know about those too. Trees are a great a great thing to bring up when we're talking about conservation easements. Again, like you are a landowner, you can still collect firewood on your property. You can still be cutting down trees on your property. That is all written into the conservation easement. You're not allowed to cut down trees just because you have a conservation easement. I'm still collecting firewood, right? It really is tailored to your needs as a landowner. Laura.
And I will say that there's numerous conservation easement holders that we work with who have gotten support through, like the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council is one. He owns a 66 acre easement. He's gotten 35 of those acres treated for fuel reduction. There's another landowner in the Scott Valley who's got the big CPIP grant for fuels reduction. There's another landowner who's in the process of getting another fuels reduction project going because he has an easement. So it's just these grants that are available are much easier to obtain, and you get more support because you have a conservation easement in place. And then as grants come across our desk, we are definitely going, oh, that fits, you know, Tom out in, you know, Thompson Creek, and we send it his way and encourage him to apply for different grants for, you know, wildlife habitat restoration, for a number of different, you know, water efficiency, fuels reduction. So it kind of goes, that's the process, right? It helps us to send the right things your way, depending on what sort of easement we hold.
Yeah, fantastic. Again, anyone online, if you want to pop a question into the chat, we've got folks watching it in case you have any questions, so pop it in there. Any more in-person hands raised?
What about mineral rights?
That's fantastic. That's another layer. Alexis, you want to talk to mineral rights layer?
Yeah, usually the mineral rights, if you have like a quarry on the site, we can draw a circle around that and you can continue to take rock for your roads, write it into your management. If there's like subsurface mineral rights, there are ways to include that you can still extract. We don't live in gas and oil country, but there are easements out there and they do allow some of that extraction. So case by case basis, but normally what we'll see is someone's like, I have this little rock quarry, I use it for my roads, and we'll just identify that and that can be.
Fantastic.
So what about any precious things?
We're still looking for it.
Well, if you find it, yeah, it's a thing. This comes into that confidentiality aspect of this acquisitions process, right? What kind of gold are we finding?
Well, we have a lot of quartz.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something you can definitely retain. It's just negotiable for sure.
If you forego that right, then that increases the fair market value of your conservation easement if you forego that right? So if you say, we know we have quartz, but we're never going to take any of it, that increases the conservation value, that fair market value of your easement.
What about artifacts?
Great question.
You guys a mandated reporter, do you have to send?
Nope.
Nope, the answer is no.
Nope.
The answer is no. We are not mandated reporters.
I think we tried one time to get somebody to come out and cut trees and stuff like that.
Mhm.
We have to send out an archaeologist, and we have to do an EPA, and we have to do this and that, but we went, never mind.
Yeah.
There you go.
We don't have to do any of that, which is nice. We're exempt from CEQA for this process, and we don't have to do cultural surveys as part of our.
Thank you. That's important. Exempt from CEQA is important.
Goes up and mills want it, chip. We could have a forest plan.
Exactly.
Yep.
We're really trying to make this work for you. It's your land. You get to use it the way you see fit, and we make that process cater to you.
Still, yeah, you can still harvest timber. You have to go through the THP process with CAL FIRE. There's still those, you know, legal hurdles that you have to go through. But that's separate from us.
Right.
You become the land trust. But yes, you're still allowed to harvest timber if it's written into conservation.
Belinda?
I was just gonna say, there's an awful lot, well, there was, I don't know about this year, but last year we had a huge fuel reduction on all the properties on this meadow. And they came out and masticated some areas and they hand cleared other areas. And that was, I didn't pay a cent. And none of us paid a cent because it was a fuel reduction, which is different than having somebody come out and help you clean up your trees. So you might want to keep your ear to the Siskiyou County, county, ask the county, different things like that, because there are other agencies that are doing that, and it was all grant funded, so.
Yeah, Shasta Valley RCD would be a great
That's it.
resource for you.
I never remember that.
Yeah, because if you have somebody privately do that, that's
Oh, yeah,
very
no,
expensive.
that's why I'm telling you, this was 100 acres of clear stuff, not mine, all our neighbors, anybody that wanted to participate.
Yeah.
But it was also because it borders Mount Shasta City, and so, a ways off, but it's the forest, us, and Mount Shasta City, and so they want fuel reduction on that ridge. So I don't know where you are, but just keep your eye out for that, because that's a really, that was amazing. Yeah, that's all.
When I saw those flames coming up over the ridge,
Mm-hmm.
we went out and bought an RV coach. I'm back with for 2 weeks, the hotels were charging $1,000 a night.
I know. We can't help with that. I'm sorry about that, but we like to hear it. Yeah, Steve, go for it.
Okay, so again, as part of the survey, when you're looking at a chunk of land, so that's something that comes up, mineral rights. So I don't know if I had a bad title insurance company, but they couldn't tell me if I had who had mineral rights to my property. And they said you can bring in a lawyer if you want, and that specializes in that kind of stuff. So do you guys look into that kind of stuff when you're looking at a property? If the landowner doesn't know? That's just.
Yeah, we pull, as part of our due diligence and process, we pull a preliminary title report based off of the parcels of land that you own. And in there should be information on any mineral rights that are associated with.
Then I'll bring up another one. So maybe I just had a bad title insurance company because he couldn't tell me. And then another one, there's a road drawn in as an easement on part of my property. And so I said, so what's this? Because there's no information on it with the county or anyone else. Oh, you'd have to go dig in the archives and maybe they would find something, but again, you'd probably have to bring in a lawyer with expertise in this. So, so far I haven't had anyone try to use the road, but.
That's good.
So, but that would be a very important.
That would also
for
be
you
in the title report. So when we pull a title report, we're looking for anything that would hinder putting a conservation easement on there. So we're looking at any public right of way access, utility easements, mineral rights, who owns those.
So beyond just pulling the report, I guess what I'm asking is, would you put money into actually, if you have to dig deeper? Because it's not right there in the report.
If there's a red flag, then yes, we would look more into it, and we would do our own due diligence, and we would bring you and whatever expertise, legal team. if necessary.
In our experience, if there's an easement through your property or somebody else that has mineral rights to it, those things are recorded.
They are.
So they're in that title report. I don't know if your guy didn't dig it out, but if there's an easement, who has that easement and how the description of it should be in that report.
Okay.
And when a conservation easement is put on your land, then that's also going to be pulled with any preliminary title report in the future. So it's a history of your property.
Right.
I'm not sure, sorry, you had that experience with that. but
Well, no, I
yeah.
think, so that's a good point what you said, it's recorded. I think what he's telling me is there was nothing recorded, even though when you look at the county parcel map, here's this little easement road, it's actually drawn on the property. And in the mineral rights, nothing could be found.
And it's yours.
Yeah, it sounds to me like there's no recorded easement on your property.
You even have some that, like a road that's a named road that ends at our driveway, says that it continues right through, but it doesn't.
It
It's not
doesn't.
on that,
Because it's not on the report. It's not on the title report. Exactly.
It looks like it on the map, but it's not
There
on the
you
title
go,
report.
perfect example, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and I have a situation on my property in Gazelle where there's an old road that's been there forever and it goes up to the old Dewey mine that was closed in 1938, but people want to go to the mine. So they'll just come driving through. We're going to the mine. And I said, excuse me? You see that no trespassing sign? I said, do you need me to call the sheriff to explain it? You know, or I'll put my trucks across the road or something, but no, it looks like a road, but they can't go on it. And if nobody has used your easement in 5 years, it's extinguished. So you want to just keep track of that. I'm not an attorney.
Dorinda and Steve to connect afterwards about possibilities. All right, I'm excited about the connections being made here. Again, if you have questions for us privately that you didn't want to ask here out loud, if you want to approach any of us about questions you have, if you'd like us to facilitate a conversation with a landowner, if you have specific questions about what that process looked like for them, we'd be happy to do it. We'll ask you again to please fill out those surveys in that folder so we can continue to bring you this fantastic information. Grab some noshes, all of our business cards on the table too, if you wanna jam and go. And I have one more thing from Hannah over here.
I just wanted to put in a plug on kind of piggybacking off Linda, what you were talking about, is we do have a really great relationship with the Shasta Valley Resource Conservation District, and they are actively seeking landowners for prescribed burning, for fuels reduction, even defensible space work. So if that's something you're interested in, we can definitely put you in contact with the right person to get that work done. So yeah.
I'm sorry, who was seeking?
Shasta Valley Resource Conservation.
Yeah, okay,
District.
no, I already.
Yeah, I believe you were at our workshop at where it was,
Yeah.
Great.
If that's one of your goals, if that's one of your conservation goals, then like we said, we'd be happy to help you get there. If protecting your property is one of your conservation goals, we'd be happy to help you get there. You are excused. Like I said, please feel free to approach us with any other further questions you have, but sincerely, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you had a good evening. Drive safe.
I just want to volunteer.
Thank you so much for coming.
You're very welcome, very interesting.
Hey, maybe I can.
Nice.
Okay, great, thanks a lot.